The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone, or I should say good afternoon. It's a little past 12 p.m. on Thursday, May 5th, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar with Lindsay Adler. Let me just do a brief introduction to Lindsay, to those of you who are not familiar with her, although considering her reputation in the industry as a fashion photographer, I'm sure most of you have heard of her and seen her work. Lindsay is a New York City-based fashion photographer and educator. She's already published 4 books and is working on her 5th. Lindsay is a Canon Explorer of Light and an X-Rite Colorati. So today's session, which is going to focus on the workflow for a successful fashion shoot, Lindsay's going to cover everything from start to finish. We have partnered up with B&H for today's webinar, and the follow-up emails will provide everyone with links to a special promo code, along with a link to Lindsay's Creative Studio Lighting Guide. There's some free downloads there and some for purchase, and it's an exceptional lighting guide. So don't miss that. In addition to all of the work that Lindsay's doing, I'm sure you see a lot of her work featured on the magazines, and she's a guest speaker and a commercial photographer for all of the top brands, for Canon and Adobe and Microsoft, as well as all the big commercial design brands. So, Lindsay, I'm going to hand it over to you, and I will be back towards the end for the Q&A session. Thank you, everybody.
All right, thank you. And thank you for having me on. All right, everybody. So as you know, we've got it's about an hour-long session. And if this is fashion shoot workflow from start to finish, well, then I'm going to need to talk quickly because I've got a whole bunch to say. And so the idea behind today's session is, if you're going to do a fashion shoot, what are all the considerations that you have to not only get it started, but to work from start to finish successfully? So that's exactly what I want to walk you through. But of course, maybe for those of you who don't know me, a bit of an introduction is appropriate. And so these are some of the things that we will in fact be covering. We're going to cover concept development, gathering your creative team, considerations for the day of the shoot, retouching and file management, and of course, delivering the files at the end. So if you haven't seen my work, I define my style as being clean and bold and graphic. And I shoot a lot of fashion photography. I shoot a lot of beauty. I have a studio in New York City. I love really, really dramatic lighting, dramatic clothing, avant-garde. And one of the reasons that I feel this way is, nowadays we're constantly fighting for people's eyes, right? We all see so many images constantly, whether it's online or whether it's on TV or whether it's a billboard. And so if I create an image that doesn't grab your attention, then no one's even going to look at it at all. So that's kind of how I define my work. And I just wanted to give you a peek inside my studio. This is kind of the hair and makeup area, and I have an office, and this is the shooting area. Now, the reason I wanted to show you this is because, as you can see, it is a blank space. It's a canvas. There's nothing there. And so all of the images that you see of mine in the studio, I start with nothing. And so I think it's appropriate to talk about the workflow. How do I go from absolutely nothing to something spectacular and then get it into print or get it to a client? So we're going to start with those 5 tips for workflow from start to finish. And we're going to begin with concept development. I think one of the biggest things that I see photographers fall short on is that when you look at their images, you don't really know what it's about. What was the purpose? It's just a person standing there. The light doesn't really fit with the clothing, which doesn't really fit with the location. It's an okay image, but it doesn't have impact. And without impact, it's not memorable. And that's what I said. You have to have impact. You have to capture people's attention. So we have concept development is that very first piece of the pie. The key to a successful fashion shoot is planning. When I have an image, I don't just show up and then say, okay, hey, hair, do something. Hey, wardrobe, do something. Hey, model, do something. Like, it doesn't work like that. I have a clear idea ahead of time of what I want for hair and makeup. What's the idea? So always ask yourself, what is the main idea behind this photo, and how can all of the pieces come together to express that idea? And the pieces are posing, and the hair, and the makeup, and the wardrobe, and the lighting that you choose, all of it together. Now, as you plan a shoot, I mean, granted, I'm a fashion photographer, but that's just a title. Fashion for me also could be hair shoots, or it could be shoots based on skin or cosmetics like you see here, or the fun stuff. And this is some of the things I'm going to talk about today would be editorials. Really, an editorial, it's the collection of images that you see in the back of a magazine. It's usually based on a theme. And in editorials, that's usually where I have the greatest creative freedom to do what I want as a photographer. I'm the boss. I have the ideas. Sure, I have to fit the magazine, but really the concept and the execution, starts and ends with me. So that's what I like to do the best. But as a little side note, if you've seen me teach about fashion photography, you'll know that editorials pay the least. So I just find often the more control you have, the less people pay you, which makes no sense, but it is what it is. So let's just talk about that concept development. So you're figuring out in your shoot, are you doing this for fun? Is it for a client? Is it for a magazine? What's the point of this image? And then what you do is you build something called a mood board. And a mood board is a collection of images that express overall direction and inspiration of a shoot. So basically, it's a visual map for how the shoot should go. And it'll contain images for the type of hair that you like, and the makeup that you think fits, and the wardrobe that you would ideally have, maybe the type of lighting that you're thinking about. And so basically, when you create a mood board, you should look at it and have some idea of what the shoot's going to look like. Now, especially if that photographer has a style, you should be able to look at the mood board, know the photographer's style, and have a pretty strong idea what the results are going to be. And that's really great for clients. If I get hired by a magazine or a dress company or whatever it may be, it gives them confidence in what the end result's going to look like. And I then send these images, I send these mood boards off to the client or the creative team. But the key here is that the images on a mood board do not need to be your own. I find them on Pinterest from other photographers, other people's websites. It's just meant to be a visual map. So let me show you what I'm talking about. And this is an actual mood board that I did, and I submitted to a magazine, and I submitted to my creative team. And this is where I start on a shoot. My workflow step number 1 is to build this mood board. So as you can see here, I have an image for the location and the type of clothes I would like to have, the look of the type of model I would like to have, the kind of hair and makeup. Hair is not important. I want it pulled back, with makeup, the eyes, I want to be dramatic. Now, of course, I have this image in here because it's dramatic. I look fancy and impressive because my location I was shooting in Dubai, so it was very, very dramatic. But this is an actual mood board that I submitted, and I sent to a magazine. And I asked them, if they were interested in hiring me for the shoot. And later on, I sent it off to my creative team. Now, let me fast forward in the workflow, the scheme of things. Let me just show you some of the images that resulted from the shoot. Here are a couple photos that I took that were directly from this mood board. The hair, the makeup, the wardrobe, the everything came from the ideas in that mood board. And so here's another shot. So if you know my style and you saw this mood board, you kind of know the direction that I was headed. So this is what I recommend for that workflow step number 1. Planning with a mood board sets you up for success, clearly allows you to visually represent the ideas of the shoot. Now, a couple other things for these pre-planning stages, before you've got your hair and makeup team, before you gather everybody, again, what's the purpose? If you plan on publishing in a magazine, well, you need to know that you've got to get minimum of 5 different looks or different shots, maybe 10. And so really, I'm not trying to teach you about necessarily shooting a fashion editorial and all the considerations, but the fact that there are considerations. If you're doing a shoot that's just for fun, that's one thing. If you're doing a shoot that's for a model's portfolio, that's one thing. If you're shooting for a magazine, that's another. But you just need to plan ahead and know what the purpose is. And by the way, if any of you are interested in being published in magazines, I put together a guide of 75 magazines that accept submissions, fashion magazines. And this is completely free. You go to this link, and I've got, I links. It's like 75 different ones, including the submission link and the type of magazine it is. And feel free to download this one now. In the next month or so, maybe the next 2 months, I'm going to have the version 2 of this come out. So it'll be all new magazines, and I think we're close to 100 on this one. That'll be a good place to get you started for getting published. And then, another thing to know this exists, when I shoot, and I do plan on shooting for a magazine, what I try to do is I try to get something called a pull letter. And a pull letter is from the magazine, and it says, if you look here, it says, I confirm that contributing photographer Lindsay Adler will be producing editorials for these issues. And really what it's doing is it's saying, hey, fashion designers, lend her clothing. Hey, model agencies, lend her models. Hey, hair and makeup, this is going to be published. Definitely get on board with this shoot. And so in the scheme of things, if I can get this right away, it's going to help my shoot be more successful. So I try to get a pull letter. Once I've created a mood board, I send the mood board off to a magazine. I say, hey, are you interested in this shoot? Would you be willing to give me a pull letter? And that's what I do for most of my shoots. Develop the concept, request a pull letter. And that sets me up for success, which sets me up for step number 2, which is then gathering my team. I've got the idea. I've got the okay from the magazine. So who is my team? And I usually already have an idea. And so this is an important point to just get us started. The importance of building a team. I work with different hairstylists and makeup artists and different wardrobe stylists, but really I have a very small core number of people I work with over and over and over again. And this took me years to do. So if you don't have a team, it's not, there's plenty of time to do so. I tested dozens of different hairstylists, dozens of different makeup artists to find that core group. And the reason that core group is so important is several times over. One is they understand me as an artist. So when they look at my mood board and they know my style, they know what I'm looking for, understand the type of photography I do, and we build up a really smooth communication. We're all on the same team. We're all on the same page. Also, it makes it easier as I'm pitching to magazines, and I'm pitching the team that I plan on shooting with. So they can also, for the magazine, get an idea of that artist and how they'll be contributing. But even beyond this, the reason that I included this particular spread, this was an editorial that I had in Marie Claire, particularly I believe this is Marie Claire, Indonesia. One of the reasons that building a team is important is because they expand your network. And the makeup artist that I work with most often, Grisel Rosario, she was the one that had the connection to this particular Marie Claire. So when we shot this editorial and pitched the mood board, she was the one that had that contact. So building your team sets you up for success in other ways, just beyond the actual execution of the shoot, but also in the network you're able to build. So that's why I recommend building a creative team. And when I talk about creative team, I'm talking about hairstylist, makeup artist, wardrobe stylist, your model. Also, it might be a manicurist on set or a set designer. It depends on the shoot. Now, I wanted to give you a couple tips for my workflow of how I have found my creative team. And believe it or not, I found my creative team originally on Model Mayhem. Now, granted, I've been working with these people for 6 years now. So, 6 years ago, it was we were all just beginning. We were all just starting our careers. And so I went on Model Mayhem, which is a social network that has hairstylists and makeup artists and wardrobe stylists and models, has everybody. And I started to make connections with people that were talented, passionate, and wanted to grow just like me. So it's one place that you could find your creative team. I've also looked through magazines that I would love to be published in. I've looked at those magazines. I have done my research. I say, oh, wow, I love the hair in this shoot. Who did the hair? And then reached out to those individuals. Now, in the days of the internet, I can go ahead, I can connect with them on Instagram. I can connect with them on Facebook or Snapchat or whatever it is to build that relationship. And then, of course, in New York City or in bigger cities, we have creative agencies. And this would be companies that represent hairstylists and makeup artists to try to get them work. So I have that as well, but don't think that you have to be in a city or be extremely experienced. Like I said, none of us were that experienced or had incredible portfolios when we started to work together from Model Mayhem. Now, if you're in a smaller area and you want some more local resources, I've gotten hair and makeup from local cosmetic counters, from the the Macy's or the Nordstroms at the mall. I found people on social media. I've gone to local cosmetology schools or local hair and makeup salons. For clothing, I've reached out to local boutiques, so, asked to borrow clothing, or I've gone to fashion weeks. A lot of small cities have a fashion week, and that's a great place to network. Now, I have a lot of other presentations that go into this stuff a little bit more in depth, but I just wanted to let you know that, sure, I live in New York City. I have my creative team that I've developed. They all have their own job, but even if you're in a small city or in, a smaller area in general, you can certainly still build a creative team. And I just want to give you an idea. For example, on the right, that headpiece I found from a designer on Etsy, and I had her ship it to me. The headpiece on the left, I found this girl on Facebook, and she made it for me and sent it to me for this shoot. So I have been able to source some things myself, but the more you can build your team, the better. And so let's just talk about the equation, the part of the equation for models. So here's what I want to do, what I usually do. Okay, we start off with that mood board, right? Sometimes I try to pitch it to a magazine. Then I reach out to my creative team, and I see who I can gather for hair and makeup and wardrobe or whatever other pieces I need. So I've got my idea, I've got my team, and then we reach out for models. And when I first started, I got a lot of models from friends and family members. My models were people I found on social media, but nowadays I work with model agencies. So let me just tell you how that works. What I do is to find a model, I reach out to the agencies, and I'm usually looking for a specific type of model. They're called new faces or development models, which basically it's the models that need your photos for their portfolio. It's not the ones that have been shooting forever and already have the huge campaigns. It's people that are interested in developing their books and testing, which what that really means is they're not going to charge you, or they wouldn't charge you very much. And I don't believe in spending a ton of money to do shoots that are building my portfolio or for self-promotion. Everybody's benefiting from the images, so everybody should be working together. So what I do is I call up the model agencies and I request to speak to somebody who's in charge of the new faces. And that's my code for saying, I'm interested with a girl with perhaps less experience or a girl willing to work for free in exchange for photos. And just to give you an idea, what I do is I call up the agency and I say, hey, this is the shoot, this is the concept. Can I follow up with an email to provide you the mood board and more details? Do you have any girls available? So I follow up, and this is what it looks like. It says, hey, I'm a fashion photographer in your city, and I'm interested in doing a fashion shoot with one of your new faces. Here's the concept, mood board attached. Here's hair, makeup, and wardrobe. Do you have anyone available? And then ideally, best case scenario, they send me a whole bunch of models to choose from. It doesn't always work like that, but ideally that's what happens. And so going down our entire set, right? We got our mood board. We reached out to a magazine, ideally. I gathered my creative team. I reached out to model agencies. I've selected my model, and then what I do is I send out a call sheet. And a call sheet is basically the schedule of the day with all the details. And so on the left, you can see a real call sheet that I have sent out before. It has information on the contact info for everyone who's involved. It tells them if they need to bring anything special in particular. It has the start time for each person. It has the addresses, the approximate rack time or end time of the shoot. So basically this is a map of the day. And I include this again with the mood board with an update of who the model is. So everyone is on the same page. Now, there's a lot of other things that could be involved in your workflow. Do you need permits? Are you needing insurance? But let's just assume we're keeping this a little bit more simple. Just know big shoots, it can be more complicated than that. And there could be a lot of people on set beyond what I even just listed. So let's jump now to number 3, the day of the shoot. I've got my creative team. I've got my model. They know the schedule of the day. They've got the mood board. Now it's time to shoot. So let me give you an idea of how the shoot runs and some of my gear, and just kind of answer some of those questions for all of you. On the day of the shoot, my schedule, okay, obviously I'm giving you a generic schedule. Not every day looks like this, but just so you could have some idea of what a typical shoot day looks like for me. And let's say that this is a 7 or 8 image editorial. So I need to shoot 7 or 8 looks. And usually what that means is we change the hair and makeup 2 or 3 times, and we change the outfit 8 times. So 8 a.m. my photo team arrives and we set up. And then 8:45, I've got it set up, looking kind of good, and the creative team arrives. So what this means would be hair, makeup, and wardrobe. We arrive and we sit down and talk about the shoot, right? We all want to get on the same page. We talk about the first look we're going to start with the hair and where it's going to transition to. We're just making sure the day will run smoothly by having a little 15-minute pre-session. 9 a.m. the model arrives and the hair and makeup begins. And I usually budget, depending on how complicated it is, up to an hour and a half for hair and makeup to get done for that first look. Because maybe the hair needs straightening or curling, and at that point they need to build the base of the makeup, the foundation. And so that's usually what we do is we start model around 9 a.m. and we try to start shooting by 10:30. Usually we start before 10:30, but that's really my goal, is no later than that. And then we take a lunch break a little later to make sure we have the energy up, and then we finish the looks, and I usually wrap somewhere between 5 and 6. So it's a pretty long day, and I'm shooting quite a few images. For an editorial, low end, 8 looks, I would probably shoot, let's say low end, 500 to 600 images. High end could be upwards of 2,000. It's usually not. It's usually around, between 600 and 1,200, just depending on the shoot. How many different looks? Is it movement? If we're doing a lot of movement, I'll shoot a lot more because I'm trying to catch just the right elements coming together. If it's beauty, I'll shoot a lot fewer. So there's a range there, obviously. So here's the schedule of a typical day. And let's talk about the gear I use. Now, for my studio, I use ProPhoto D1 Air 500 watts. Personally, I own 6 of them, but usually I'm shooting with 1 to 3. I have an Air remote. I also shoot a lot with the Canon 5DS, and I'll tell you why that's relevant in a minute. We'll just talk about tethering as well. The lenses I use most often would be the Canon 24-70, 70-200, and 180mm macro. I have other lenses, but this is what I use most commonly. I'm going to be shooting tethered, and let's just go through these next elements, okay, about gear. Let's talk about tethering. So, when I tether, I typically tether into Adobe Lightroom CC. One of the reasons I do so is that tethering capabilities are included. If you have Adobe Lightroom Creative Cloud, I have the Adobe Creative Cloud photography plan, so for, I think it's $10 a month, I have Photoshop and Lightroom, the newest versions, at all times. And tethering is built into Lightroom. So I do that because it's one less cost I have with buying another program. Now, one of the reasons I like to shoot tethered is because I'm plugged into my computer. So as I'm shooting, the images are showing up in Lightroom. Now, this lets me review the images. If there's a client there, they can review the images. But for me, it's more about team collaboration. So my hairstylist can be standing there watching, and she can go, oh, wow, the hair looks bad. Hold on a second, and she can go fix it. Because sometimes you might not see stray hairs with the naked eye, but when you see it tethered, because of the lighting it's showing. Or the wardrobe stylist might not have noticed a piece of the clothing that was folded over. So I like to have it tethered so everybody could see their piece of the pie. Specifically, this is what my setup looks like. I've got my Tethered Tools Tethered table. I've got a place for my hard drive, which is going to be G-Tech. I'll show you the hard drives I use later. And then I have the Tethered Tools Tethered cable, which you see on the right. And specifically the one I have here is the USB 3. And the reason I have this one is that particular adapter is what fits for my Canon 5DS. So as I'm shooting, the images are popping up right there in Lightroom. All right, now, here's where we talk about the part. Of course, this is being hosted by X-Ray. And so, I want to include this, but this is also something that, for me, is incredibly important, my color management. I need to make sure that I am paying attention and managing my color throughout the entire photo shoot process. And I'm going to give you a fantastic demonstration of why this is so important. Now, what I usually do is I make sure that I have calibrated all of my monitors before the shoot. Because, for example, if I'm tethering to my laptop and then I'm plugged into another monitor and they're not showing the correct color, well then I'm not actually seeing what I'm capturing, right? So what I do beforehand is I calibrate with the i1 Display Pro on any place that the image is going to be shown. But even before that, that's way before the shoot. I don't try to do that on the day of the shoot. But before I shoot, once I get my light set up, I am going to make sure I take a photograph of my model with the X-Ray Passport color checker. I do this for each shoot. Let me show you exactly why. This is really important. This is what I'm talking about. If you're wondering what a color checker looks like, it's not just a gray card, and I'll explain the difference. See how we have all the little swatches of color there? What those are is they are specific numerical values. Like the plugin I'm going to show you how to use, they know exactly what colors made up that blue, exactly what colors made up that red. And so what I'm going to be able to do is create a custom color profile to make sure each and every color is accurately represented in my image, which is different than white balance. White balance gets rid of color casts, which is fantastic. But depending on your lens, depending on the lighting, depending on your camera, colors shift separately from white balance. So let me just give you an idea. Okay, so this is a shoot that I did this week. And this is a company, the dress that she's wearing, it's a company that I work with all the time. They've hired me to shoot a bunch of different things. I also, I shoot their pieces for editorials frequently. And so let's say that I'm doing a shoot for them where I am meant to be advertising this dress. I need to show the correct color. I'm a fashion photographer. If I'm being hired to do a fashion shoot, the clothes better look like the actual color they are. There shouldn't be any color shifts. So let me just show you why this becomes so important. Here's a picture. I take a close-up shot, and the light hitting the model's face in the dress, I need to make sure that same light is hitting the color checker. All right, so this is what you need to pay attention to. None of this is tweaked for exaggeration. This is exactly what happened. Image number 1 is when I shot with auto white balance. My camera had no idea what to do with the color in the scene. And that is nothing like it looked to the naked eye. It is completely off. That dress is not the color that the designer designed it to be. All right, well, then what I did is I did a typical white balance in Lightroom, which you guys are probably familiar with. You can take the eyedropper and you can select a neutral swatch. And then what it does is it gets rid of color cast. So it got rid of the blue color cast. But I don't know if you guys can see this on your screen, but if you look at the difference between the far to the one on the right and the one in the middle, see how there's more vibrancy, a little bit more magenta to that pink purple? You know, the dress itself is a different color. It's the color that it actually was in reality after I created a custom color profile. So I want to walk you through that real quick so you can see kind of what I'm talking about. And then I just want to show you, here's a before and after. This is what my camera captured if I did auto white balance on the left, and then once I created a custom profile and did retouching, I ended up with a picture on the right. And the dress is correctly represented on the right. So let me just pop over real quick to Lightroom. Okay, so what I did is I took a close-up picture of the model with the color checker, making sure that the light that was hitting the model in the dress was also hitting the color checker. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start in my Develop module, and I'm going to grab my white balance eyedropper. So what I can do is I can click on one of these neutral swatches, and click on the one in the middle, and it fixes the white balance issue. So it already looks so much better. I mean, my scene was not blue, and her skin was not that gray. It was definitely meant to be purples. So again, clicking on that gives me purples. However, let's talk about the next step of the equation here. The next step of the equation is making sure this purple is accurate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a custom color profile with the X-Ray Passport Color Checker plugin. All right, so the first thing I need to do is I'm going to hit the R shortcut, or it takes me over to the crop option. And I'm going to crop way in, so I'm just having an image with my color checker. So let me just crop in here. And just, trying to get rid of extraneous information. By the way, just for how the plugin works, make sure that you have the color checker right side up, aka the people's heads are correctly positioned, aka they're vertical. So here you go, cropped in. Let's create our custom profile. I'm going to go to File, Export, and I've already installed this plugin to save us time. But what you're going to do is select the X-Ray presets. And so I'm going to create a plugin. And what it's doing is it's referencing those colors, and it's going to make sure those colors are showing up correctly, how they're supposed to be, since those are controlled values that the computer, the plugin, knows what they're meant to be. So I'm going to call this Test Blue. Okay, and I am going to export. And I already created this. Let me just call it a different name because I tested this before. Test Blue 2. Great. Okay, so it's going to process, and it's creating a custom profile. All right, so it takes a second, And eventually, where you will be able to find this custom profile is if you're in Develop Module in Lightroom, you go all the way down to camera calibration. Perfect, okay. Go all the way down to camera calibration. By default, the profile is Adobe Standard. What I've just done is I've just created a custom profile based on this lens, this light, this camera, okay, this particular scene. And so it is going to be test blue. To get it to show up like the one that I just did, what you have to do is you just restart Lightroom. Okay, so I'm going to restart Lightroom, and it will now appear where that Adobe Standard was. It'll be another option. All right, so I'm going to go back down. Okay, so what I want you to do is I want you to watch in the bottom, the blues and the kind of periwinkle and purples. When I switch my profile, watch what happens. Do you see? I'm going to do that again. Ready? See how it changes? Do it again. The colors shift a bit. And what it's doing is it's shifting them to what they are supposed to be. All right. So why do I care? Well, in this photo, there's one thing I can do to get white balance. And we talked about that. So let's say, let me go back to library here. And let me just white balance correctly this photo. And what I can do is sync settings. If you don't know Lightroom well, get to know it. It's great for this. I'm going to click on the first photo where I've gotten the correct white balance. I'm going to hold Control, click on the second. I'm going to sync settings. I'm going to make sure the white balance is synchronizing. So you'll see if I do the before after. Let's go back. There's the before, and here's the after. So the white balance made a big difference. But watch this last part. If I go back into the Develop module, and I come back in, and I switch the color profile, look at that. I mean, that is a massive difference in the purple. That changes the background, it changes her dress. Watch this again. Let's go back. Here's before. Let's switch back. It changes the color so it is the accurate purple. So if I look at these photos, let me take a look real quick. Let's take these photos. In this first example, this is with auto white balance. Over on the right is when I've just fixed the white balance using the color checker, but just clicking on the white balance swatch. And then on the left is when I have created that custom profile. Look again, more magenta in the purples, they're more saturated, so it makes a big difference. If you're a fashion photographer, you definitely need to take control over your color. So that's part of my workflow, is I make sure that when I am shooting, I take a picture of a color checker, and I am making sure that I have that custom profile applied to the images. And that's just to give you an idea why. So let me kind of continue on here. So we've captured the images on the day of the shoot. Let me tell you a little bit about how I manage my files. So let's jump over into that. Okay, so here's what happens. I am shooting tethered. So as I'm shooting, the images are being populated into Lightroom, and they're automatically being downloaded onto an external G-Tech portable hard drive. I only use G-Tech hard drives. I've had fantastic experience with them, and so I start with the portable hard drive that's there. Now what I do is I make sure I'm shooting tethered, the images are on a hard drive, but I also am shooting to a CF or SD card to make sure that the images are backed up. At all times, at minimum, I want my images to exist in 2 places, so I do not format the CF or SD cards. My second step is I back up the files onto an external rated G-Tech tower. So what that means is after the shoot, I go home, I back up the files, and it's being backed up to a big hard drive, which actually is mirrored. It's in 2 places. So what it's doing is it's giving me 2 backups, just in case basically half of it fails, just in case. Next, what I do is I go through my entire shoot and I select my favorite photos, the ones that are the keepers or the ones that I want to retouch. And what I do is I upload them onto Photo Shelter. So I will tell you about Photo Shelter a little bit more in a bit, but basically that's what I'm using right now for my cloud storage of the selects. I don't put everything up in the cloud. I don't honestly, for how I shoot, I don't need everything up in the cloud. What I need is just those select images that I plan on retouching or the ones that made the final cut. Now for me, it's safe to format the CFSD card because not only do I have my images in 2 to 3 places, but the good ones I even have in the cloud. And then the final step is the final photos. Once they're retouched, they go on to Photo Shelter, and then they also go back onto my rated hard drives. So in the end, this is what it looks like. Start off over on the left-hand side with my portable G-Tech drive. That's where they go during the shoot. And then they get backed up onto some drives so that they're mirrored, meaning that even if part of one of the drives fails, I still have a backup. So in the end, they exist in 2 physical places, 2 hard drives and 1 place in the cloud for all of my important files. That's what I consider actual archiving. It's not just having the images on a hard drive, it's having them in multiple places. So if something fails, if something breaks, if something is dropped, if something's corrupted, I know I have them safe and sound elsewhere. All right, so let's talk about, now I've got the files all backed up. Well, let's talk about retouching. Well, what I use Lightroom for is for culling and editing, so narrowing down the photos. And this is where I handle my white balance, my custom color profile, and then my exposure. That's pretty much all I personally do in Lightroom. There's a few other things that I might do, but that's really the extent of it. But most of what I do is in Photoshop, and I edit in 16-bit RGB TIFFs. Personally, I edit in Adobe RGB rather than ProPhoto Color Space. It's a whole different discussion. Sometimes I do, but typically I'm giving my usual workflow. It's Adobe RGB. I start by removing blemishes, then localize, dodging, and burning, frequency separation, contouring, and liquefy. If you were going, okay, what the heck is she talking about here? I have a variety of tutorials available. I have an educational site, which is learn.lindsayadlerphotography.com, and I go through these more in depth. But I just wanted to give you an idea of what I do in Lightroom versus Photoshop and the type of files I'm working with. I'm trying to keep as much information as possible. I'm trying to do non-destructive editing, and this is basically the order in which I do things. I do the blemish removal first, the localize, dodging, and burning next, frequency separation, contouring, and liquefy. That's the order. Liquefy is last. Now, let's say that I want to do funky colors. I want to do some colors to the shadows, and I want to do some, whatever. I want to do a color cast on purpose for the mood of the image. I save this to the last step so I can change my mind. I can make adjustments. If you do it in the beginning and then you go ahead and retouch, there's no going back. You're stuck with it. So I can do color grading in Photoshop, and typically I use a tool called Selective Color Adjustment Layers. Selective Color Adjustment Layers, I talk about this again in some tutorials on my site, but I also use some different plugins or external programs. I use Alien Skin and also On One. So those are 2 that help me out. And sometimes you kind of have an idea of what you want for the image, but just scrolling through some of these plugins and softwares, it shows you the possibility, and maybe it takes an image a completely different direction that you didn't even realize that you might want to take it. So here's the final piece of the equation, is file delivery. So with file delivery, how are the files getting to the client, to the magazine, to my creative team? What I do is I put all my files up on Photo Shelter. And what it allows me to do is it gives me a content management system. So on the back end, I have password protected galleries. And let's say I'm submitting to a magazine. What I do is I give them the password protected galleries for the high resolution images, and then I also provide them with a low res layout. So let me show you Photo Shelter. Here's the back end. This is what it looks like to me. So this is that desert shoot I did again, and I have all my images, high res TIFFs there. And then what I can do is I can create a password. So here I did Queen, and then I can select if a person has a link to this gallery with the password Queen. How can they download these images? Can they download the original files? Can they download only small JPEGs? And I can pick which one. So then what I can do is I can save and notify, and basically it'll give them a link, it'll provide them the password, and then whatever size I'd said that they could download, that is what they can download. So it is very, very useful. And I want to make a point here, just for those of you who might be unaware, if you're trying to shoot for a magazine, magazines don't like it if you post the photos before they do. If they're going to go to print and you put them all over your Instagram and all over your Facebook and they haven't put it in their magazine yet, they're like, well, you kind of spoiled the surprise. So that's why there's this thing called right of first publication. If the magazine selected the work, has accepted it to publish, wait until they publish it before you do. And this is a link of the little layout that I send to the magazines when I'm submitting. Yes, I give them the link to the high-res files on PhotoShelter, but I also give them a layout like this. So you can kind of see the images, and I have my creative team listed there, and this is what I would send them, as well as a link to the high-res. I do not attach high-res files. People get mad because it fills up their inbox, and it's impossible to view. If you're going to attach any files at all, they should be super low res, so it's easy for them to pop up immediately and be viewed, which is why I do a single JPEG or PDF anyway, so they can quickly get an idea of the story. Now, if I'm going to print the images, typically because I'm a fashion photographer, when I'm printing images is if a client hired me to, or I use them a lot for promotional materials or thank you. Thank you to the model, thank you to my creative team, thank you to the client for working with me. And how I print them is with the Canon ImageProGraph Pro 1000, which I have a picture of it here. This is the actual setup in my studio. So I will make sure that I have my monitor calibrated here, and then I plug in and I can print, make sure I have the correct printer paper profile, and it comes out beautifully. But there's one other piece of the equation to consider. Is sure, I definitely have shot with my color checker originally, and I make sure that I have my laptop calibrated. But whatever monitor you're editing on needs to be calibrated as well. So take a look at these two prints. The first image is when I was printing from a computer without having a calibrated monitor. And it looks a little green and it looks a little bit dull. However, look at how much better the skin tones are and how much better the vibrance is when I'm working with the correct color profiles and the correctly calibrated monitor. It makes a massive difference. So you just want to make sure you do that in your workflow to save you time. Of course, the last piece of the puzzle is if you are having it printed in a magazine. You know, seeing your images in print, it never gets old, I don't think. I think it's always fantastic, and it's always rewarding. By the way, in my introduction, we talked about some of the discounts that B&H has right now for these particular products, and I talked about the Color Checker Passport and the i1 Display Pro. I use both of those in my fashion workflow, so if you are interested in them, we have the discounts for you there. So I just want to summarize what we just talked about, and then I'll go ahead and take some questions. So the 5 steps that I have to a successful fashion shoot workflow is I start with the concept development. What's the idea? What am I trying to say with the shoot? And I build a mood board to express that idea visually. If I want to shoot with a magazine, I send that mood board off to the magazine and try to get a pull letter, something to allow me to shoot and gain access to better models and better wardrobe. And then the next step is once I've got that mood board and once I've got my concept is I gather my creative team, the hair, makeup, the wardrobe, the manicurist, whoever it is, and the model. I gather the creative team, and then what I do is I send them the mood board and I send them the call sheet for the day, the schedule of the day, so everyone's on the same page. On the day of the shoot, there's many considerations, but again, I'm making sure that the lighting and the posing and everything's working together towards that original concept. I have a meeting early on in the day to make sure everyone's on the same page. And then when I'm shooting, I use an X-Ray Passport color checker to make sure that I can take control of the colors. I shoot tethered so that I can see the images and I can collaborate with my team so everyone can contribute to their piece of the puzzle. Now for the retouching and file management part, I am making sure that I am shooting tethered to an external hard drive. I make sure I come home and I back up that hard drive, and then the favorite files are going into PhotoShelter for my cloud storage of those favorite files. Then I do the retouching and managing the color and exposure first, and then I go ahead later on and do the more intensive retouching in Photoshop. And then in the very end, I'm handling the file delivery. Is it going to be digital files, which I do with PhotoShelter, or is it going to be prints? Again, if it's prints, making sure that I have controlled color and calibrated the entire way through. So those are my 5 steps to a fashion shoot workflow. And as you can tell in the time that I was given, or the time that we have today, that is a ton of information. And in fact, I can go a lot more in depth into each of those. And that's some of what I do on my educational site. I also plan on coming out with more tutorials if this is something you're interested in. And also, you can come visit me in New York. I do intensives 3 to 5 times a year in New York City where I have small groups, 10 to 12 people, where I go through a lot of this information. So the next one I have is a 5-day fashion intensive limited to 12 people at my New York studio in June. So if you want to join me for that, I'll be able to answer even more questions than we have time for here. But right now, I have a few minutes. I think I have about 10 minutes or so to answer any questions that might have popped up. So let's see. To my lovely moderator, do you have any questions for me to take a look at?
Hi,
Oh,
Lindsay. This is Sandra here.
Hi.
Hi. So
Hi,
if you
Sandra.
check in your in the chat window, I've populated it with
Yep.
several questions from today's participants.
All right. Beautiful. Okay. Oh, those are great questions. Okay. So let me answer these in order. So Stephen K asked, what kind of cameras do you use? So most of the time I am shooting with DSLRs. And the DSLR I shoot with most often is a Canon 5DS. And the reason I shoot with a Canon 5DS is it is a 50.6 megapixel camera. And so I have the ease of use of shooting with a 35 millimeter camera. I can use all of the lenses that I already own. The price is extremely reasonable, but I can get a ton of detail. So if an image needs to be blown up to a billboard or a massive print, I'm going to be able to do so. So that's why I choose that particular camera. Now, Steve is asking me, what type of ISO settings do I usually use? Most of the time in the studio, I try to shoot as low as possible, particularly with the 5DS. I want to keep that noise and that grain as low as possible because I do have so much information. It becomes more visible at higher ISOs, the actual noise there. So I'm shooting most of the time around 200 ISO. Depends on the shoot, but that's where I aim for. So right now, Dana's asking, who has the best RAW file processor? Right now, I use Adobe Camera Raw. However, On1 is coming out with something that I'm really, really interested to test out and try. So stay tuned for that because I'm going to be doing some testing with that, and I'll be able to give you my thoughts and feedback on it. I know that a lot of people and a lot of editors and retouchers really like Capture One. That's also fine. It depends on what you think pulls the most information out of your file for your end result, where you're going to end up. And obviously the importance of processing the file, it really depends on what the final usage is going to be. All right, Vivian asks, when using mood boards with other people's work, is there any concern for copyright infringement? The answer is no. I am not using these for any commercial purpose like selling them or presenting them online. This is purely purely for inspiration. It's purely for reference. They will go nowhere else except for within our email so that everybody's on the same page. So it's completely fine. I'm not using them against the author's wishes, and I'm not making any money from their images. Justin F., thank you. He says, I love your work, Lindsay. Joel asks, what do you do when a critical person is a no-show? I have definitely encountered this, and I know your pain. I'm sure you're speaking from an experience that was miserable. In the beginning, I had such problems with this. All the time, critical people wouldn't show up, like the hairstylist wouldn't show up. And then what we would do is we would have to make sure that the makeup and the concept worked if I tried to pull the hair back. Or, because I live in New York City, we would run and go get a wig. Things like that. But really the answer is to build a team. When you build a team of hair and makeup and wardrobe, they become a member of your creative family and they do show up. Or if for some reason they can't show up last minute, what ends up happening is if they're your team, they find you a replacement. They help you. This is why I always kind of build in backups as well, but building a team is really the answer for all of that. Okay, Henry says, just found my missing color checker. This program gave me the incentive to get my wife to look harder for it. Lindsay is such a fantastic teacher. Well, thank you very much. I try hard. Kevin says, can you explain frequency separation? So the very quick explanation for frequency separation is often what happens is when someone's trying to smooth skin tones, and I don't mean like blur them out, but if you're looking and someone has blotchy skin or uneven tones in the skin, frequently when people retouch, what ends up happening is you get rid of texture and it looks fake. And so what frequency separation does is it basically separates the texture of the skin from the color and the tone. So it basically sucks out that texture. So I can smooth out and even out color. I can smooth out tones or transitions between highlights and shadows that show imperfections. And then later on, I can add the texture back in. Now, high-end retouchers try to do most of this with dodging and burning locally. So just, lightening and darkening small areas. Frequency separation I found to be a useful shortcut in certain situations, and I would definitely try it out. If you've never seen frequency separation before, on my blog, I've got a free action that will do frequency separation for you, but to know what it's doing, you have to do a tutorial. You have to watch a tutorial, and I have several of them on my site, and also I've done several creative lives that touch on frequency separation, but it really completely changed my retouching and how I do post-processing on a file. Steve Washburn asks, do you put keywords on all of your images in Lightroom? Great question. For the way that I shoot particularly, I don't need to put a lot of keywords in. Most of the time what I do is I make sure that the client name is in the file name, so at minimum I can search that. But upon import, if I know a few things about the shoot before I even start, I set it up so that upon import it's got a couple keywords. Maybe it's fashion or a color or the client name or a particular season or a particular magazine, whatever it may be. But I don't usually go through extensively and add a lot of keywords. It's usually whatever is applied upon import. The next question is, Jim Metz says, name of the X-Rite software that saves profiles created in Lightroom. So it's you can download this X-Rite plugin. I'll show you real quick. Let me just pop out. Let's see. If I go to export, it says X-Rite preset color checker passport. So this is a preset you can download for free on the X-Rite website and install. It just, you have to have their color checker in order for it to work. So that's the specific name of it. All right, let me keep popping through a couple more of these. Shane M asks, how do you handle a color cast contamination that partly covers your model? That's a great question, and yeah, color casts are difficult. What I will usually do is I will double process an image. So I'll process it once so that part of the image has the color checker for one side and then the other part for the other, or I will just try to correct it, and what I'll do is I'll correct it twice. In Lightroom, doing two virtual copies. If you don't know Lightroom, I apologize if this is, doesn't make sense, but I do two virtual copies, and then I open them up as layers in Photoshop, or I will use a localized adjustment brush and paint in the effect in Lightroom. So it kind of just depends on what's appropriate for the image. Obviously, trying to avoid them in the first place is preferred, but it is what it is sometimes. Okay, next person says, Joe Tharp, since you use the color checker, do you use auto white balance when shooting? Typically I really don't use auto white balance. I try to get the white balance preset that's closest. So I'm going to try to use, for example, the flash preset when shooting with my ProPhoto D1 Airs, because I know that that's the best one for that. But I'm always still shooting with the color checker. I just try to get as close as possible so it looks as good in camera as possible, which is, of course, our goal in general. Question was, during the import into Lightroom, do you convert to DNG? I usually do convert to DNG, but it depends. Because I shoot with such a large file format, so if I'm shooting with the Canon 5DS, sometimes it just takes a little bit too long to do the automatic conversion to DNG. So sometimes I'll convert it later on just because of the extra time it takes for it to show up with the tether, and I'm impatient. So I know that patience is not, in the scheme of life, one of my virtues. So the answer is yes, sometimes, but I am in the end always working with a DNG file, and I actually send DNGs off to retouchers if I'm working with a retoucher that's not myself. Jonah asks, do you ever have a client or other team member hover in helicopter, interrupting and giving the model direction? How do you deal with that? That's a fantastic question. Yes, I have had that happen. Um, so it depends. If I have a client, it's their right to look at the image. And so, unfortunately, what I just try to do is say, oh, with whatever the problem is, let me just try a few more like this, and then I'll try it your way. Then we'll have two options to choose from. Something like that. If it's a team member, I'm the boss, so I try to tell them like, it's let me work through this. I need to. That's a little distracting or something. Or what I do is, if they're being really difficult, I'll be like, oh man, the tether isn't working, and then I'll just minimize Lightroom so that they can't see it until I'm ready, and then they leave me alone. And sometimes I have to do that. Um, but for the most part, with more experience, I've become more in control of the environment, and I let people know what information I want from them. It is definitely not directing the model. And I'll let them know, and I'll say something like, as you look at the images, if there's something to do with your piece of the equation, the hair, that you think you need to bring up to me, let me know. It's proper set etiquette before someone steps on set or interacts with the model to say stepping in, because otherwise they're breaking up the connection and the flow I have with the model. And I let people that are new know this, that there's a very important flow and connection that I have. And so they need to be sure not to interrupt that. So I think, let's see, I think the last question I can answer is, do all of your shots go directly to hard drives because of the tether as opposed to your camera? I have it set up so that they go both to my camera as the SD or CF card, as well as the external drive. So I have it set up for both. So I have a couple final announcements for all of you because we're right at the end of our presentation today. All of today's attendees are going to get a link to the recording of this webinar within the next 24 hours. So as you can tell, as a New York City photographer, New York City person in general, I talk quickly. There's a lot of information. Do not worry, you will be able to access this webinar again. And then, of course, I wanted to thank everybody for joining me for today's presentation. I know that there was a ton of information, so if you're new to this, don't feel overwhelmed. What you really need to do is break down the pieces of the pie. Start slowly. And of course, the more you practice, the more experience you get, the more smoothly this will all go. So I hope today's presentation was very useful to you. And if you would like more information, of course, you can check out my educational site, which is learn.lindsayadlerphotography.com. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you, X-Rate, for hosting me. And thank you, Sandra, for being my moderator.
Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye.